Welcome back to hour two of Nothing Personal with David Samson. It's Thursday, which means we have a guest, and we're lucky today on the heels of Hall of Fame weekend when all the talk is baseball. Today is the trade deadline in only just a few hours. You know him from MLB Network.
Mhm.
You know him as the greatest voice in play-by-play history for me, a broadcasting god in my own mind, Bob Costas.
I
Welcome
think
back,
I,
Bob.
I think I will leave on that introduction because it was excessive, and how can I possibly live up to it?
Well, you can just live toward it. You
All
don't
right,
have to live up
I'll
to it. You
I'll
can
lean
just
I'll lean in on it.
like Ichiro's speech where he
Yeah.
talked about dreams and goals. We can say that this is not a dream of yours to be a broadcasting god. It's an actual goal that I would argue, and many others would too, that you've achieved it.
Well, that's a very nice and perhaps inflated way to put it, but I had a pretty darn good run. I'll settle for that.
It has been an amazing week in baseball.
Hmm.
Yesterday, a bunch of trades happened. We know what's going to happen as we head towards 6 o'clock, but I still have Hall of Fame on my mind, thinking about the weekend, thinking about everyone and their thoughts of
Hmm.
Ryne Sandberg and Dave Parker. Dave Parker did not make it to his induction, but his son did him so proud with that
Yes.
speech and the Cobra's poem at the end. I just was smiling because
Hmm.
I was looking at it. And like when you see someone from your high school days who you assume hasn't aged, and then when you see them for the first time, you don't quite recognize them. I was looking at who I thought was Dave Parker because his son is an absolute twin.
Yeah, pretty close. We should also mention Dick Allen's widow, Willa, did a very fine job as well. Cece's speech was very good, but as could have been expected, if you had to just pick one, Ichiro stole the show. Not because he was trying to one up anybody. Ichiro's a very respectful guy. You think about Ichiro and Ryne Sandberg, and the word that best fits each of them, if you are confined to just one adjective, it would be respect. They respected others. They played the game with great respect. But everybody who knew Ichiro or knows Ichiro realizes that he is also a prankster and a jokester. And so all of that came out in his speech, his reverence and respect, but also poking at a few people and a callback to his famous or infamous, depending upon your point of view, interview with me in 2003. The interview itself in total was great, but all that survives for most people is the 38 seconds when I asked him what his favorite American expression was. And that was his cryptic reference when he said, I have bad teammates, right, Bob Costas? That's what he was referring to because after he said his favorite American expression was August in Kansas City is hotter than two rats in a bleeping wool sock. And then after I cracked up, because that was the only time he spoke English the entire day, um, he was speaking through an interpreter every other answer, every other exchange. We all know now that his English is remarkably good, but at that point it wasn't. But he had that phrase down. And after the laughter subsided from me and the crew, he looked around, very satisfied with himself, and he said, I have bad teammates, who obviously gave him this expression, which he didn't exactly have 100% right. So when he said, I've had bad teammates, right, Bob Costas, I think maybe a third of the audience got it and laughed. And the rest of them were like, what's he talking about?
Oh, I think it was more than a third, and I'll tell you why. Because A, it lives as one of the glorious things on YouTube, but
Yeah, it
B,
is.
the irony of you being associated with that, you're a serious guy. And listen, people who know you, sort of like Ichiro, you're funny, you're charming, you're interesting, but you are associated as in with Ichiro for that comment that he made and
Yeah.
for that joke, and it makes me laugh.
Well, it's been all over the internet for more than 20 years, but I don't know how the algorithms work. But obviously, with last weekend being Hall of Fame weekend, it got pushed to the top. So it got a whole lot more clicks over those 2 or 3 days than any other 2 or 3 day span.
Tell me about your favorite memory because we were trying to talk about Ryne Sandberg, and I was trying to explain to somebody, either on the show or a friend of mine, how to understand a player of his caliber on the field and my memories of him when he was managing the Phillies in
Mhm.
Marlins Park. And if you had to describe Ryne Sandberg and do it in a way that can people understand in terms of today's game, how would you describe him best?
I would describe him as elegant in a sense, flawless. Was he the greatest player of his era? No. Does he have the overwhelming statistics of many people who are in the Hall of Fame? No. But he hardly ever made a mistake on the field. Fundamentally, he was a perfect player. He won 9 gold gloves, not so much for making spectacular plays, but for fielding 99.9% of routine plays and turning the double play and almost never making a base running mistake, being an excellent all round player. The year he won the MVP, 1984, which was also the year where he had his signature game, the so called Sandberg game at Wrigley against the Cardinals, he only hit 19 home runs, 2 of them that day, but he also hit 19 triples and stole a bunch of bases and played gold glove second base and showed up every day and was an example to every kid watching, but also to every teammate. This is how you play the game.
So one of the people who was not there, there were 52 Hall of Famers there.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Emeritus Bud Selig was not, and yesterday was his 91st birthday. And I was speaking to him on his birthday. I've known him. You don't know this story, Bob, but you
Mm-hmm.
will now. I met him when I was 18 years old.
Really?
I was dating the daughter of the team doctor for the Brewers. And so I got to meet Bud, who was the owner of the Brewers at that time. So he knew me basically when I was a teenager. And so we speak every year on his birthday. And he turned
Mm-hmm.
91. And he was lamenting an article that came out yesterday by Dan Shaughnessy that was talking about the fact that players like Jim Cott or Rod Carew, Jim Cott actually said, I feel like Mr. Irrelevant now. Jim Rice said, the young players don't want to talk to me about how actually to hit line drives because they care about launch angle and
Yeah.
velocity, and how current coaches don't want the older players to talk to the players anymore because they don't want the older players to ruin what they're trying to teach them.
Yeah.
And then we go to a weekend like this, you talk about Ryne Sandberg, you see the Hall of Famers, and you have to ask the question that Dan asked, which is baseball getting worse? Are players getting worse? And Shaughnessy had a few things to say about that, as did the Hall of Famers.
Having not read Dan's column yet, I can't dive too deeply into it. In some respects, the game is better because the players as a group are more athletic and they're receiving specialized training, a specialized form of fitness that goes not just to baseball, but to the specific position they play. So you can't say that players of an earlier era were better athletes, but there was a different approach to the game. And some of this is generational. When Ryne Sandberg passed away this week, all the highlights of his career came up, and the Baseball Network is going to replay the entire Sandberg game, I guess, this weekend. And for a lot of people, it'll feel like the baseball they grew up with.
Mm-hmm.
But some of that is just, look, you can understand why somebody might, they'd be wrong, but some 20-year-old might say, what's the big deal about the Beatles? But we know because that's what we grew up with. Even if you could say to someone of our generation, and I'm a little bit older than you, here's somebody now, just burst on the scene. They're objectively, and it's hard to be objective about music, but objectively, they're as good as Bruce Springsteen or Billy Joel or Motown's best or the Beatles. It can't land the same way. That's the music of our youth. Ryne Sandberg and that era, the players from that era, are the baseball that a huge chunk of Americans loved. So it's not an objective fact that that's better or worse, but I know why people connect to it. Some people connect to it more.
When you get into a discussion, and I'm thinking about your days in the NBA, and one of the
Uh-huh.
great debates about, who would beat, people love doing this. Which
Yeah.
team would the Golden State Warriors beat Michael Jordan's Bulls, the best Golden State team and the best Bulls team? Who is it? LeBron? Is it MJ? And I
Mm.
think it's the same argument, which is it's super hard to compare eras. The play was different, the players were different. My good friend and yours, Red Holzman, we
Yeah.
would talk about today's game, and he died a long time ago. Pat Riley and I would talk about it.
Uh-huh.
That the game is so different today. It doesn't mean it's better, doesn't mean it's worse, but no pick and rolls. It's all isolations, but it's also just a reflection of what people think. And certainly in baseball with analytics, what's the most efficient way to get a win?
Right.
Because the truth is, all you're trying to do is win. So I can't really begrudge today's baseball, but I do recognize the difference.
Yeah, and the same thing in the NBA. Analytics tells you that if you shoot 40% as a team on threes, that's better than shooting 50%, which is usually unattainable on twos. Because if you've grown up shooting threes and you can get some kind of open shot, that's not going to be contested. Whereas shots in the lane are generally contested. But it's not as textured a game as it once was. The mid-range jumper is almost a thing of the past. And it kind of rubs me the wrong way when here's a fast break and the two guys on the wing go to the
Crazy.
corners instead of taking a nifty pass and finishing off with a layup, which is a beautiful basketball play. And some of us would like to see someone lay down a sacrifice bunt successfully, you know, the occasional hit and run. Now, I'm not saying that that actually increases your chances to win if you do it more often than perhaps you should, but it does add texture to the game. So the game, I think it's better now outlawing the shifts. It's better now with the pitch clock. There's
Mhm.
more of a running game now, stealing bases because the base runners are emboldened, not so much by the larger bases, but that is a minimal factor, but by the limitation on the number of times you can throw over. So the attempts and the successful percentage has increased. So all that is a good thing. And every night you see incredible, spectacular athletic plays made. And how can you not like it when some kid from Lancaster, Pennsylvania, big Irish, hits 4 home runs, goes 6 for 6, and hit a double that was almost a fifth home run. So it was entirely unprecedented. I mean, every day and night you see stuff that makes you love baseball. But
I, I was
but is
thinking,
it, is it
Bob, back.
reasonable, David? Is it reasonable, David, to say, you know what? I'd like to see a true pitcher's duel. I'd like to be able to look online or old school, look in the paper, probable pitchers. Wow, Roger Clemens against Pedro Martinez. Sign me up. But now we know that that's generally gone after 6 innings, even if they both have a terrific outing.
We were
So it
thinking
takes some of the
about
drama out of it.
Bob, we were thinking about Jack Morris.
Yeah,
And when he was introduced, Hall of Famer,
yeah,
obviously what he's famous for, he was unbelievable. But a
right.
10 inning, game seven, a 1-0, back when pitchers, you see Fergie Jenkins at the Hall of Fame, and you think about the complete games, Juan Marichal. But I was thinking back about Ichiro and whether or not his game would play today. The prime, when he had 9 straight seasons of 200 hits plus, his batting, he'd hit for
Yeah,
average. People complain he didn't hit for power, but I think his game would play. And he made a reference during his speech to the one writer. He was left off one ballot.
right.
Otherwise, he would have been the first unanimous position player in the history of the Hall of Fame. You could argue whether he deserved it, but don't you? It bothered me a little bit. Do you think that all ballots should be public?
No,
How
no,
come?
not necessarily. Um, I guess it's not the same thing as voting for political office, but there's something about uh, the sanctity of the booth, I guess, the voting booth, not the broadcast booth. But in a case like that, you hope that in the case of Derek Jeter, who also missed by one, and Ichiro, that man or woman would come forth and explain their logic on it. No one could say that Jeter or Ichiro wasn't worthy of the Hall of Fame, but there might have been other reasons. Maybe those voters said, hey, if Willie Mays wasn't unanimous, if so and so wasn't unanimous, then I'm not going to vote for anybody. I'm going to withhold my vote and be the one person that stops that person from being unanimous. And as we know, sometimes voters are strategic about it. Jeter doesn't need my vote. Ichiro doesn't need my vote. They're going to breeze in, but I'm going to vote for somebody near the bottom of the ballot to help that person get over 5% and stay on the ballot for next year and maybe pick up some momentum. None of those arguments are convincing to me, but that's part of the rationale, I guess, for some people.
I guess my view was that I understand why you don't have to tell people who you voted for president or city council.
Right.
When you're talking about the Hall of Fame, it's a far more public. It's a huge responsibility for a
Yeah.
small number of people. If there were only, here's the analogy in my mind. If there were only 500 people who got to vote for president,
Hmm.
and that's it. I think that it would be necessary for the public to understand who voted for who and why. And that's why I've always viewed the Hall of
Yeah.
Fame as an example of that.
Your argument is better than mine, and you've won me over. And, a lot of writers, even if their ballot isn't particularly controversial in any respect, they will put their ballot out there and explain both their inclusions and their omissions.
To me, that makes the most sense, and I'm going to keep fighting for that. And it's not over yet. And we're talking about the game of today. I want to get back to that a little bit. We
Uh-huh.
talk about pitch clock. We talk about bases. The disengaging the rubber rule. The rule that doesn't get talked about entered my head because of my conversation with Bud for his birthday is the DH and the expanded wild card. A change in the playoffs and
Hmm.
a major, major change where pitchers don't have to hit anymore. And the impact it's had, and
Yeah.
you're seeing it this trade deadline where teams feel like they're in it. There's way more buyers than sellers. And it makes it inequitable when you're figuring out the Mets made a trade yesterday where they overpaid for a reliever in a way that would give me night sweats as the president
Hmm.
of a team to trade for Rogers the way the Mets did. And I just think it's solely because it really is a seller's market and there's no change in sight for that. I think that's a
Well,
rule that's a problem.
the third wild card has an obvious upside, and it's this: unless and until they can somehow, if not equalize, then bring closer together the large revenue and payroll gaps. What the two central divisions and the idea of three wild cards does is it gives you a chance to get in if you can win 85, 86 games. Last year in the American League, three of the six playoff qualifiers came from the Central: the Tigers, the Guardians, and the Royals. And the Twins were in it until the last week. So it isn't just that 12 of 30 teams make the playoffs, but another half dozen or so of those 18 that don't, another half dozen at least, are alive into the last week. And that's part of the objective anyway, to keep fan bases engaged in some way. But to your point, uh, front offices have to be very analytic and cold about it. Yeah, we're only at the trade deadline. We're only 3 games out of the third wild card. Do we really buy to make a push, or is the cold hard fact that we're mediocre? And so we shouldn't do that. We should hold on. We should hold on to what we have, to the prospects that we have, and hope to build a better team for the future. But that second and third wild card is enticing, and they have fan bases that demand that you go all out, because going all out now may just mean winning 84, 85, 86 games and you get in. And we know that in some cases, not only do you get in, you can go deep.
Your
Did
Cardinals,
it?
you can win the whole damn thing.
Right. The Cardinals did it before there was a third wild card. The Cardinals did it. Right.
I was thinking that what we would look at more, though, Bob, is we'd look at the number of teams we'd have to pass.
Yeah.
More so than the number of games out. I would always say if we're within five, I always wanted to buy because I just wanted to always go for it and had reckless disregard for our farm system. But the truth is, what we focused on was number of teams to pass, because it's really hard when you're 3 games out, but you have to pass 4 teams. If you look at the schedule and you look at how it
Right.
works every night in baseball, it's hard to pass
Well,
that number of teams.
it used to be if you were 3, 4 games out in a divisional race, that meant that A, almost certainly you were a good team, and B, you're chasing that team, as opposed to trying to make your way through a jumble. So it needs to be a cold, hard calculus uh, when you decide to buy, sell, or stand pat. And sometimes that extra wild card can be a mirage. I
It's
also
an
think,
exciting day, Bob, and the trade deadline, and it got me thinking about one of Rob Manfred's pushes that would make him potentially as memorable. Well, he may still be, but as all the commissioners who came before him, His point is that the trade deadline's fantastic. There's a deadline at 6 p.m. tonight, and
Hmm.
you know that there's no more August waiver deadline. This is your team. And it
Yep.
creates all of this excitement. And one thing the commissioner has wanted is that sort of deadline in the offseason for free agents. So it would stop what he calls the death march towards spring training, where nothing happens. And in the other sports, free agency is much faster. What is your view of having an off-season deadline for free agents?
Well, it sounds good in theory, but what about the individual circumstance where a guy just can't reach the right deal? Is he stranded out there as of February 1st or January 15th?
Well, there's roster spots. If you have to sign, the way it works with arbitration and free agency, let's start with arbitration. There's a deadline where you exchange numbers with the
Hmm.
player.
Hmm.
And if you're a file to go team, which we started, by the way, and now all 30 teams do it, you see all those settlements on that day of the exchange of numbers. And the deadline causes action. I would argue that a free agency deadline would cause action both in the upper class, the top free agents, but also in the middle class,
Yeah.
which is something that's been forgotten because you just, as a front office, you say, I'm not going to do a major league contract and a spring training invite in December. I can do that in late February. I don't want to waste a roster spot. But if I had a deadline, I'd have to fill my roster with the million and $2 million guys.
What do you think the deadline is in theory? February 15th?
Oh, it's got to be earlier than that because you
February
have to
1st?
sell into your team. I want the
February 1st?
deadline. The World Series, let's say it ends November 1st. We don't need more than a month to do everything. And I would want the deadline right after the winter meetings. But I also have suggested to baseball that the winter meetings go back to being the minor league meetings, which is what they were.
Hmm.
Because it used to be we'd go because we wouldn't be able to see the other teams, the other GMs, and you'd have
Yeah,
meetings with them because you didn't talk to them. Now you're texting with them every day.
sure.
And now they all sit in their suites and you don't even have meetings face to face anymore. And it's tremendously costly for the team. But if you want to keep the winter meetings, I would do it the deadline being the day after the winter meetings.
So pretty early. It's all going to be jammed into basically a month or so.
Because once the calendar turns, we are focused on spring training and getting ready for spring training and not being able to sell. The majority of your sales,
Hmm.
corporate sales and ticket sales, happen during that off season. And if you don't know who your star is or what your team is, it really is harder for the salespeople to sell. If you ask the Dodgers, let's say, when
Yeah.
they're a funny example, but if you have a full off season of selling Otani or selling Glasnow or Snell, whoever you're
Yeah.
selling, they're gonna like it better, even though they sell out. And for smaller market teams like Miami or Cleveland, knowing who you have earlier just helps.
What does it make? By the way, you know more about this and have thought about it more than I have because I haven't thought about it until you just threw the idea out there. So I'm just going to have to defer to you. There must be a counter argument here. I just haven't come across it yet, but you make a convincing case. But I'm reminded of this when you bring up Cleveland. Apparently, the only untouchable is Jose Ramirez. Stephen Kwan is at least up for grabs if the offer is right. You're a fan of the Cleveland Guardians, who have been competitive for the last few years, have had some exciting postseason moments. If you trade Stephen Kwan, what do you say to your fan base? Not just one of your best players, but one of your most appealing players. And he's young and in the prime of his career. Is this the way it's always going to be, with the exception of only one player, just because we're the Cleveland Guardians, that once a player establishes value and he's with us for 3 or 4 years, we can't keep him. We give up. We're going to trade him. So even if we get 2 or 3 really good prospects, when they develop, we're going to do the same thing with them. That
Bob,
alienates your fan base.
you're forgetting the major point here with Cleveland, and it's gonna ruin your whole argument. We're gonna have to edit this whole thing out. Have you
Uh-huh.
heard of a shortstop named Lindor?
Yes.
He got traded by Cleveland,
Yes.
and Cleveland has been good. They're
Yeah.
back in the playoffs with other players. There's always the next player. The purpose is not to do what I did, which is buy high and sell low. The purpose is to do what the Rays do and other great front offices when you trade people at their maximum
Yeah.
value, not their minimum.
it's understood if you're a Rays fan, and it's worth noting that there aren't that many of them. Often it's fans of the other team who show up at Tropicana Field. But if you're a Rays fan, you know that that is the unique business and operational model of your team. This is what they do. But Cleveland is a more traditional franchise. And I'm just saying that fans like to be able to say, not if the team stinks, then you got to, clean house. But they like to be able to say, this is at least the core of our team. Not that we're going to shuffle the deck almost every year or every other year and wind up, like Jerry Seinfeld says, you're just rooting for laundry. You can't have a favorite player anymore. You're just rooting for the Mets because that's what the laundry is.
I've always argued that I like rooting for the front of the jersey more than the back of the jersey because the front of the jersey will never go away. It'll never let me down. But listen, I've been dealing with that argument forever. I don't know what to do, Coco. We're out of time. We asked Bob to give us 25 minutes of his time. It's done. We're done.
But let me go back to one last thing. You asked the question, would Ichiro thrive today? It's worth noting that he thrived in the middle of a bludgeon ball era, which was part of what made him so appealing. Because of his personality and his style and his excellence, he'd be appealing anyway. But he was such a counterpoint to what was going on in baseball in the early 2000s, playing a game that Ty Cobb would have recognized. Now, at that point, no one said, we don't want Ichiro doing what Ichiro is doing. Suddenly, by the way, I'm like in the Federal Witness Protection Program. Everything is turned dark here. but we're near the end anyway. I think what would work against Ichiro, perhaps, at least with many teams, is that now analytics, as we've been talking about, that's in full bloom. It's driving the whole thing. And you can look, even though it sounds awful to say, you see people making the argument, yeah, Ichiro was great. He got his base hits. Love Ichiro. Excellent at what he does. But what was his OPS? It doesn't match up. We'd rather have a guy hit 240, strike out 120 times, but draw 90 walks and hit 35 home runs. We'd rather have that. Now, would that guy be the poster boy of your team? Would that guy sell tickets like Ichiro did? Would that guy go to the Hall of Fame like Ichiro did? Is that guy almost interchangeable with a bunch of other guys? And Ichiro is a distinctive player? All true. But you wonder whether analytics would sell Ichiro short. I'd hope not.
I don't think anyone sells Ichiro short, and I don't want to ever sell you short. I appreciate your time. We're going to have to do this again because we have guests twice a week on Nothing Personal now, and you make our audience smarter. So thank you for your time, you broadcast god.
I think you made me smarter tonight. I
Thank
didn't
you,
hold
Bob.
up my end. Later.